The Champaign County Jane Doe, 1995. Identified as Keri Wyant. The skeletal remains were found on May 1, 1995, in a ditch in a cornfield located along Champaign County Road, southwest of Thomasboro in Illinois. A farm worker was preparing a field for planting when he came across a bone and some clothing. Police quickly responded, and they recovered additional remains when they were called to the scene. Her body was believed to have been dumped there between May of 1994 and October of 1994. The coroner ruled her death as a homicide, although the clear cause of death could not be determined. In fact, by the time she had been found, a lot of her bones had been scattered by predators in the area. The police did not explain their conclusion, but they believe she likely died from multiple gunshot wounds. She would eventually be exhumed, and the re-examination would later conclude her age was between 16 and 29. Even her height range was pretty wide, 5'1" to 5'9". They performed an isotope analysis, and this suggested she was born in southeast Illinois. They believe she also lived in Nashville, Tennessee, Springfield, Missouri, or Topeka, Kansas prior to her death. They believe she had one or more children, as there was evidence of a C-section. Sweatpants and other clothing found at the site held no real clue as to who she was. She had a plain gold band and another ring that had a circular pattern of dark green stones. Eventually, it would be her DNA that gave them the break. She was finally identified as Keri Wyant, age 23. The Champaign County Sheriff is asking anyone who knew Keri at any point in her life, please contact the investigators. Even if you believe the information you have might not lead to her killer, any bit helps. They are trying really hard to retrace her life. Listed on the screen are places she was known to have worked at. They do know that Keri was born in Galesburg in 1971. She grew up in the area attending Galva High, although it appears she did not graduate. She left her home in the mid-1980s for some reason. Eventually, she lived with relatives, and later at the Southside Mission in Peoria. She worked at area restaurants and gas stations, and was living in Little Rock, Arkansas at one point. They do know that she returned to West Central Illinois in 1994. She was pregnant and homeless at the time, and she eventually began staying with a friend, and it was then that she gave birth to a baby boy. She began working at the Henry County Fair. There is a gap after this as to what happened to her child, but it's believed he died at age 7 in a traffic accident. Without further information on her whereabouts, it's impossible for the police to find her killer. So please, if you know anything at all about her case, contact the sheriff at the number on the screen. In addition, Crime Stoppers allows anonymous tips. Keri Wyant went unidentified for 25 years. The Peoria Co John Doe, 1974. Identified as Anthony John Armbrust. On February 11, 1974, the body of a Peoria Co John Doe was found near the rocks at the bottom of a steep slope near the highway going past Grant, Colorado. He had died about 4 months prior to his discovery, likely in the fall or early winter of 1973. He was pretty decomposed when he was found, so it was hard to tell what he looked like in life. He had no identification on him. They know he was around 6 foot 2 inches tall and around 30 to 60 years old. It was his DNA that would give him his name back, and he was identified as Anthony John Armbrust III. He was born in Ohio in 1929, and he spent most of his childhood in Ohio, eventually moving to San Diego as a teen. In 1973, he eventually moved with his wife, Renee, to Golden, Colorado. Although the couple wasn't reported missing at all, both went missing shortly after that move. It doesn't appear she was ever found. It's hard to say how he ended up where he did, or what became of his wife. They know that Anthony died from blunt force injuries, and they believe he suffered multiple fractures when he fell or jumped from a plateau. Investigators believe he may have made a suicide pact with his wife. I struggle with how easily investigators jump to suicide. There was no vehicle found in the area or any identification near his remains. So if both were here willingly, how did they get there, and where is her body if they chose to die together? This wasn't an easy identification process either. Volunteers provided about 800 hours of genetic research. This eventually led to a relative who was willing to provide their DNA. This is all that's been released so far on this case. If anyone has any information at all, please call the number on your screen. Anthony John Armbrust went unidentified for 45 years. The Peoria County John Doe, 2016, identified as John Frisch. On June 12, 2017, a horrifying discovery was made along the banks of the Illinois River in Kingston Mines, Illinois. A decapitated human head was found along the river's edge campground. It was then another horrifying thing happened. A passerby picked up the skull thinking it was a Halloween decoration someone had discarded. They took it to their home and they kept it there. It wasn't until it began to smell that he realized it wasn't a decoration and turned it over to the police. A torso had been previously recovered in the same area on November 13, 2016, in Schuyler County, which is downriver from where the head washed ashore. DNA would later link the two body parts as belonging together. Because part of his body was found in November of 2016, it seems really strange that the skull did not begin to deteriorate until so much later. There was a hole found in his skull, which investigators thought at first was a bullet hole. But upon later inspection, it was determined it was caused by some sort of blunt force trauma. The forensic investigators would later determine that he was a white male between 30 and 55 years old. The DNA Doe Project eventually was able to identify him as John Herman Frisch, Jr., originally of Peoria, Illinois. John was born in 1960, and he would have been 56 years old when his body was found in Schuyler County in 2016. He used addresses in Peoria, Illinois, and Hawaii throughout his life. Because this was clearly a murder, the police are trying to retrace his movements in the days prior to his body being found. During a news conference, the sheriff's office asked people to come forward if they have any idea of his movements prior to his death. It was a horrific crime, the sheriff said. It shows either a lot of anger or someone was trying to hide their tracks really well. By the time he was identified, his parents were deceased. He had very limited family in the area. The police are unsure of what drew Frisch to Hawaii or what made him travel back and forth between there and Peoria. He had a police record that they were trying to use to piece together his information, but there are large gaps that seem to coincide with time spent in Hawaii. If you have any information at all on his life, you are asked to please call the number on the screen. John Frisch went unidentified for 4 years. The Lime Lady, also known as the North Canadian River Jane Doe, identified as Tamera Tigard. On April 18, 1980, the body of an unidentified woman was found near the North Canadian River in Oklahoma County, Oklahoma. Someone had shot her 3 times. They then covered her with quicklime, likely intending that this would eat away at her body and any evidence they left. Instead of causing her to decompose faster, as was probably the plan, it preserved her body. It was this condition that led to her being called the Lime Lady. The police concluded she was killed 10 days prior with a .45 caliber gun. Thanks to the lime the murderer used, her face was perfectly preserved, and it allowed sketch artists to create images of her. Police also found a heart tattoo on her chest. Otherwise, the police had no idea who their victim could have been, and they worked hard to identify her, but her identity remained a secret for almost 40 years. On December 24, 2019, the lady in lime was finally identified. Investigators received a call before Christmas they were about to get a gift. The DNA profile had been sent to a genealogist, and they were able to find familial matches as close as second cousins. Their Jane Doe finally had her name back, Tamera Tigard. As soon as she was identified, they realized that she had been in the U.S. Army, and they were able to obtain her dental records. Police were then able to positively identify her. Tamera was last known to be living in Las Vegas in March of 1980. The weapon used against her told the police it could be a biker gang that preferred use of that weapon, or at least that was their belief. Otherwise, there wasn't much to go on, and nothing pointed at a specific suspect. The police were able to trace Tamera's movements when she went missing. She had gone for a walk a month before her body was found, and she was never seen again. Her family did report her missing. However, a short time later, a woman was discovered in Ohio using Tamera's stolen identity. Somehow this led to the missing persons report being vacated. It appears the woman who stole her identity was let off the hook, without any real questions as to how she knew the identity wasn't being used by its owner. Since this identification, the authorities have given Tamera a burial complete with military honors. Sadly, Tamera's parents passed away without ever finding out what happened to their only child. Tamera Lee Tigard went unidentified for 40 years. That's it for today. Thank you so much for watching and listening. We offer new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday. At this time, the Thursday episodes are always John and Jane Doe's. If you haven't yet, please take a moment to subscribe. A like and comments are also really appreciated, as it might help with the algorithm. See you next time, and until then, please take care of yourselves and each other.